I don't want no oil, a spoil in my shoreline. I like fish much better than crud. I like birds and things, a creeping and crawling. Won't trade no more oil for blood. The sun done give us all we need to make this country run. But that black demon oil's got us fussing and fighting, and I do believe it's time we was done. I don't want them nukes run by them kooks who think radioactivity is fun. No more three-headed frogs or kids with leukemia. Nuclear power ain't fit for a dog. The sun done give us all we need to make this country run. But that nuclear power's got us fussing and fighting, and I do believe it's time we was done. No nukes! Good morning, Toledo, and good afternoon, Columbus, and hello to those of you listening on the internet, wherever and whenever you are. My name is Joe DeMar, and I'm here with my co-host,
Rebecca Wood.
And we are bringing you For a Green Future. For a Green Future is a show where we talk about ecology and the environment, and we talk about them in ways that they affect you, your family, your pocketbook, and your health, your wealth, your happiness, because we don't often think about the fact that even like the tiniest things, the bacteria, the fungi, can have a direct effect on us personally. And some of the really tiny stuff today we're going to be talking about, like subatomic particles, can't get much tinier than that.
But the world is in fact made of very tiny things, and so are we.
True. Yeah, but those tiny things can have big effects.
Yes.
Especially when you stick them together and they start exploding and melting down. And we have a very special guest lined up for you today. Her name is Heidi Hutner, and she is a doctor, a professor at Stony Brook University in New York. And she has made a documentary about the 3 Mile Island accident, specifically talking with the families, the women who were directly downwind from 3 Mile Island and who were affected by that fallout. And that's going to be about 8:15. We'll talk to her. Then we'll we'll hear a little bit about our terrific sponsors. And then we'll be talking, this is one of those direct pocketbook environment connections here. We're going to be talking about the latest plan, the latest scheme, you might say, from First Energy, which is they want to decouple their electricity rates. That is, they want to make your bill no longer dependent on how much electricity you use, which sounds kind of crazy, and it kind of is, but we'll talk about that more after the bottom of the hour and after we've talked with Heidi. Right now, we've got a few minutes to chat. And I have to say I'm a little something or other today. Let's just say I'm glad we have a really long intro song, because I was kind of scrambling to get everything together there. My wife and I went down to Columbus last night, and we attended. There's this power couple down there who have a salon every week, where they have people come and talk, or once a month they have this salon, and people come and talk to a group of people about different issues, sometimes labor issues, sometimes environmental issues. And we went because this fella is a lawyer. His name's Bob Fitrakis, and he was taking depositions from people who were collecting HB6 petitions and who got harassed by the blockers, because they're looking at a court case there, the Ohio Supreme Court, to try to get more time for those petitions. And so I was able to go down there and detail exactly how the blockers were messing up our petition gathering and really prevented that referendum from going through. And there was one woman there who was a petition gatherer, just as they say, a little wisp of a thing, a gal who's, maybe 5'2", maybe, and like 100 pounds. And she was talking about how she got surrounded by 4 huge blockers who not only prevented anybody from reaching her where she was trying to gather petitions at a library, but when she went back to her car, they followed her all the way to the other end of the parking lot. And this, dark, it was evening by then, so it was dark. There was no light around. These 4 guys were following her to her car.
So it comes perilously close to the legal description of aggravated menacing.
Yeah. Yeah, and they surrounded her car even after they got in, and they were taking pictures of her license plate. And, it just...
Which is what they call stalking in the courts, mostly, I believe.
So she, gave a deposition, and hopefully we'll be able to hold those accountable for all that nasty stuff they did around the referendum petition.
For that matter, when I was working for the prosecutor, you could go down for domestic violence for just standing in someone's way and preventing them from leaving the house.
Mm-hmm.
So if you're surrounded on enough sides, that comes pretty close to kidnapping, really. I mean, that's what it is, impeding someone's movement and not letting them leave a situation.
Yeah, good point. Yeah, and so, but while I was down there, other people were speaking to this gathering of people also, and there was one Democratic candidate for Congress down there, and she was very nice. She had a lot of really good things to say. She was speaking, but, since I was there, I had to ask, so what's your position on nuclear power? and she...
Oh, Joe.
Yeah, I know. She had given a very nice, very polished presentation up to that point, but once I asked that question, she literally started stuttering, and finally she said, well, what's your position on nuclear power?
So you're not running for office.
Yeah, I know.
At the moment.
But I told her, and then she said, well, I was just talking to a professional environmental consultant, and he was telling me we have to have nukes to meet our energy demands. And my question would be, who's paying them?
That's what professional means.
Who are they working for?
Somebody is paying you to say things. Professional.
Yeah, because we do not need nuclear power now that we've got wind and solar and utility scale battery, all 3. Nukes not only are the most expensive and the most dangerous and the least practical, but now they're not. Now they're superfluous. Now they're not even necessary. So just a little experience down there in Columbus. Don't spend much time down there. I prefer it up here in Northwest Ohio.
It's really odd that, people who are running for, what is a statewide office she's running for?
No, she's running for the 3rd congressional district.
3rd congressional. Do they have any plants? Nuclear plants?
Oh, no, not down there. No, they're
But, they pay utility bills, and part of that goes to the nuclear industry.
Now it will, under House Bill 6.
Thank you,
right,
House Bill 6.
Right, yeah. So...
So it's kind of odd that, it's that big a thing that directly connects to people's health and pocketbooks. And, a mainstream politician doesn't even think they have to really develop a point of view on it, a policy.
Right. I know.
Platform, whatever you call it.
Yeah, it's a very urgent question because we've got all these ancient nuke plants that are breaking down and getting ready to fail. And so the question is, what do we replace them with? And the answer should be the clean, inexpensive, safe alternative energy systems like wind and solar and geothermal.
And yet a lot of mainstream politicians or Ohio politicians are just like, we'll worry about that some other time.
Mm-hmm. Well, I think what happens is people get all concerned with numbers, because she was very concerned about, people's incomes, rent rates. She worked for the Consumer Financial Protection Board, which, so she would spend all her time thinking about interest rates and loan guarantees, and people get all hung up on the numbers and the economics, and they lose sight of really the physical.
Yeah, true.
So it's like, what is all this?
I mean, if it's about people being able to afford to live, okay, a place to live, okay, that's important,
Yeah. Oh, yeah, it is very important. But if people get sick because they're getting physically exposed to contaminants in the environment.
Then there's an economic impact from that too.
There sure is. And so what we want to do is, of course, have a green future, which we definitely can do. I mean, technically, all these hurdles have been solved.
And not because we're glowing green.
Right. That anonymous...
I think I'm funny.
Right. That anonymous professional environmental consultant was just telling this gal a lie, a straight-up lie. We do not need nukes to meet our energy policies. And we just have to demand a clean future because it's pretty clear we're not just going to be given one. We have to actually get in there, educate ourselves. And I think that's one of the key things about the whole anti-environmental or the anti-nuclear movement is that the people way back when it started, way back around 3 Mile Island, it was just regular people, just ordinary people who were relying on the experts to tell them about things like energy policy and the effects of radiation. And then 3 Mile Island happened, and it became clear we have to educate ourselves. We can't wait to be taught or told by the authorities the truth on things like this because they're just never going to get around to it.
Yeah.
It's much more convenient to sort of ignore truth when it gets in the way of those numbers, that economic stuff that people are so hung up on. But the thing is, of course, that the truth is there whether you believe it or not. And so I see our guest has called in. We have someone who knows a lot about the truth of environmental matters, Dr. Heidi Hutner. Thanks for joining us.
Oh, thanks you for having me. I'm honored to be here.
Well, we're honored to have you because I know you have done a lot of really good work for the environment for many, many years. Could you just tell us a little bit about your bona fides there?
Sure. I'd be happy to. So I'm a professor at Stony Brook University, and I teach something called environmental humanities, which means my background is in the humanities, but I teach environmental issues through the lens of literature, film, and the arts. And I've been doing that for a pretty long time now, and I also was the director of their sustainability program and did a lot of programming around that, so that was a pretty amazing experience. I had the opportunity to bring experts from all over the world to come speak and teach, and so that was pretty great. And I do a lot of journalism, and my focus has been on women and the environment and also environmental justice issues. And I was working more broadly in kind of all areas, in terms of my journalism particularly, but also my teaching. I have to be, able to teach students all of the topics. And then I discovered a story about my own history. I knew my parents were anti-nuclear activists from way back, the 1950s, stopping above-ground bomb testing, and they were involved with the Freeze movement in the 80s. They were also civil rights activists and in the peace movement in general. But I uncovered a story about my mother that I did not know. Long after her passing, she was part of Women Strike for Peace, which is a group of women who were largely given credit for having stopped atmospheric bomb testing with a limited test ban treaty. They worked on that to effectively stop atmospheric bomb testing, and the USSR and the UK and the US signed on to this treaty. So when I found this out, it was a remarkable story, which I won't go into all the details of. That really pushed me into looking at the history of women and nuclear, and so that's my own personal focus. That's what I'm working on now, primarily.
Mm-hmm. Well, I think let's rest on that atmospheric test ban treaty for just a moment, because that really is kind of a remarkable thing in human history. Because a lot of people don't know this or don't remember this, but there was a nuclear bomb race. Basically, the U.S. and the USSR were locked in this competition to show who could make the biggest bombs, and they were just exploding bombs left and right, blowing up entire islands, making huge craters all over the Earth. And there were hundreds of these explosions. But it came to light that they were creating radioactive fallout that was literally going everywhere on the planet. And once the truth of that came out, all sides, as you said, the USSR and the Britain and the Brits and the US all realized, hey, we're killing ourselves with this show of force. If we keep doing this, if this fallout keeps going around the Earth, there's going to be incredible health effects. People are going to, and so they agreed to stop doing it. Just there's a weird, rare moment of rationality in the worldwide war machine. It's kind of an incredible story.
Didn't that happen? Sorry, go ahead.
And importantly, it was women who led this, and mothers, and in a time when women played especially in this country, but everywhere. The 1950s was a pretty I would not call it a feminist era by any stretch of the imagination. In fact, it was sort of a backlash against women in the workplace. It was it was the 1950s home, suburbia, expansion of all that, and so it was really truly remarkable that this group of predominantly white women, but not only, rose up and when they discovered that strontium-90 had been found in baby teeth gathered from all over the U.S., and that milk in particular was contaminated, so breast milk and cow's milk. So this was really a feminist act. I want to call attention to that. And it was women who made this happen and used deliberately metaphors about pregnancy, babies, breast milk as a way to do that. I don't want us to forget that, because this is part of my work, is to really remind us how important women have been in this movement.
But I think it's pretty safe to say that we today in 2019 are much healthier than we would have been if that insane bomb exploding race had continued all these decades. And yeah, so strontium-90 is a radioactive isotope of strontium that gets into babies' bones and teeth and irradiates them from the inside. And it wasn't there before we started blowing up all these bombs and melting down all these nuke plants. So it's an ill that we've created, and it's really an inspiring story that they stopped it. And so you are sort of descended from that kind of activism.
Yes, very much so. And then looking at that history, it really it shocked me that I didn't know it. I mean, I grew up in an activist household, but that my mother's story and the story of these women, all these mothers, had sort of been, buried within the general activism, which is why I sort of chimed in here really quickly, because that's the common thing, is to say, this is a great story, but then to forget. It was women reacting very strongly and independently, and it was the fact that it was women that was so shocking to the male politicians, and that they were sort of able to shake things up. And then that sent me on this journey to really look around at silent stories about women that have been doing amazing things, but also, negative ways in which women are most harmed, which I'd go into. But so, yeah, it's pretty radical. And that's the scary thing about strontium-90 is that it stays in the body and radiates. So once it gets into your bones, it continues for a long period of time.
Mm-hmm.
So sociologically speaking, they kind of took the sort of pigeonholing, your role is just to be wives and mothers, and we're like, turned that to our advantage. We're like, if we're wives and mothers, here's a big problem with being a wife and mother that you're creating.
Exactly.
Here. Yeah, they use that to their advantage, kind of.
They did precisely.
Okay, and so that searching has led you to the 3 Mile Island event, and this year is the 40th anniversary of 3 Mile Island, and in fact, around the anniversary, we did a special show on it, and it's there on our podcast and our YouTube video if listeners want to go back and listen to that. But very briefly, what happened at 3 Mile Island was a series of mechanical and human errors that led to a partial meltdown of the reactor, so that some of the fuel rods did in fact become molten. It just, luckily and amazingly, it just didn't go all the way to the point of that Fukushima did, where the meltdown continued all the way to the end and all the fuel rods melt through the bottom of the container. It was largely contained, but not completely contained. There was radioactive stuff put into the atmosphere, into the environment, and that's where you come in this story that you've covered with this new movie you've made. Accidents can happen. The Women of 3 Mile Island. So tell us a little bit about how you came to do this specific movie.
Well, just to clarify, we are in production, so we're almost done with shooting, and we soon go to edit. So we're not done yet, but almost. We're getting there. We're close. So I came to it because when I found this story out about my mother, I began this journey, and I'm also writing a book called Radiophobia, a nuclear memoir, where I began looking into stories about women and anti-nuclear issues in many places. So, soon after I learned the story about my mother, the Fukushima meltdowns, the triple meltdowns happened. And I lived near New York City, and I ran into the city immediately when all these events were taking place. A lot of, interestingly, women from Japan came to New York to kind of sound the alarm and say, the world needs to be paying attention to what's happened. This was a few months later. After Fukushima, they came and they had a number of different events. There were some things going on at the UN. The Prime Minister was here speaking, and they were sort of sounding this alarm. The world needs to pay attention to what's happening in Japan, and you're not looking closely enough, and you're not. So there was an event I went to, and I met several of these women who are key activists in Japan. Eileen Miyoko Smith was there, who has been working on this issue for years, and Sachiko Sato, and this sort of was the beginning of a present-day journey into looking at nuclear disasters and interviewing women. And so I've been doing this now for a long time, interviewing from different places and writing about it. And I was invited to speak at 3 Mile Island for the 39th anniversary. And so at that point I was beginning the process of doing a documentary on nuclear issues. We weren't quite sure which disaster we would cover, or we'd been kind of shooting in different places. And I was invited to go to 3 Mile Island, and we went there and we shot in the morning at 4 a.m. with a group of people who hold a vigil every year to commemorate the disaster. It began at 4 a.m. on March 28th, 1979, and we were there at 4 a.m. And that was it. We met a group of 4 mothers who are just extraordinary women, and they lived 5 miles from the meltdown in 1979. And so we tell their story, and through what happened to them and their experience, you relive that journey. And we tell it in a micro and macro way, because the 3 Mile Island meltdown also galvanized a larger anti-nuclear movement, and that too was very, very much the loud voices were very much, a lot of women, Dr. Helen Caldicott and Dr. Jane Fonda, and a number of others. And so we also, they're in our film, and so we're sort of macro and micro, showing what happened in this small town to this community of women and how they were galvanized, and they were, every day stay-at-home moms for the most part. Some of them had part-time jobs, but really their primary work was just leave it to Beaver. It was very, very simple, very happy lives they described, pretty innocent. And then they woke up. Mm-hmm. They woke up and their lives were completely changed.
Well, this might be a good point to play the trailer for your film. And Russell, our able technician, has it all queued up here. And let's take a listen. So it opens with sound of a train, that a group of people huddled around, holding on to each other in the shadow of 3 Mile Island.
The towers from our kitchen window. But I had absolutely no idea what nuclear power was.
So I guess it's 4 women. This is underground.
This accident that you can't see it, smell it, taste it, feel it, or know anything about it. And my husband had metallic taste when he came back. And I said, don't worry about that. It can't be radiation.
To assure the people of this region that everything possible is being done and will be done
Voice of
to
Jimmy
cope
Carter.
with these problems, both at the reactor and in the contingency planning for all eventualities that might occur in the future.
What really got me were these men standing up in their suits saying, yes, we have everything under control, yes, we know what we're doing, and they didn't have a clue, not a clue.
That was held in Caldecott.
We're going to Harrisburg, which is where 3 Mile Island is. Go to a vigil where I think people meet, they congregate outside, and they remember at the hour that the meltdown took place.
Right now it's 3:47 a.m., okay? In about 5 minutes, 6 minutes, is the actual time of the accident. So just to go over, we have the Unit 2 over there, which still has nuclear debris in there from the accident. And because of the inaction of the NRC, this site here, 3 Mile Island, will be a nuclear waste dump for the next 100 years or more, a high-level nuclear waste dump. They're not going to take the waste away from here.
Okay. I think that gives our listeners a taste of the film that you're making, and I think it's an important film because we have a tendency to forget in this society. We have a tendency to move on to the next thing, but the wastes, the effects, the ecological damage done by nuclear accidents and nuclear energy and nuclear power, those, even if we forget about them, they continue. And we can't let ourselves forget about them because it's a real and present danger that we have to do something about, or we will, and our descendants will continue to suffer the effects of it. Would you agree with that?
Absolutely. I think one of the issues, as my dual role as a filmmaker, and well, I should say more than dual, writer, filmmaker, and I'm a professor in a classroom. I teach these issues, and every semester I open up by saying, have you heard of 3 Mile Island? Have you heard of Chernobyl? Have you heard of Fukushima? What is nuclear power? And it is shocking how few students know anything at all about nuclear anything. And that's really why I'm doing this. I mean, I've been teaching it for a lot of years, this issue, and you see the same. It's like this bizarre film of here they come again, and here the conversation begins again, and nothing has changed. I would say there's a minor difference now. A few students have watched Chernobyl HBO, and so there's an awareness, and that is also my reasoning of making a film is that I see the power of media. I see the power of documentary filmmaking. Something like Josh Fox's Gasland really put fracking into the public eye, and I feel that I have a personal sense of urgency watching the generations of incredible activists from that era in the 80s and 90s and ended in the 90s, but who did this. They were, it was all over popular culture. Everyone knew about what the dangers of nuclear power. They knew about Chernobyl. They knew about 3 Mile Island. They were still concerned about nuclear war, and now it's just there's such a silencing, and it's very worrisome. So the film is a wake-up call and a reminder. 40 years ago is not very long, and there's been, as there's been many other nuclear meltdowns, ones smaller ones, more silenced ones, less obvious ones, and leaks and all sorts of accidents that the public does not know about, and they deserve to know. It impacts us all.
Yeah. We have time for a call if any of our listeners would like to ask Heidi a question at 866-240-1065. That's 866-240-1065. I forgot to do that promo at the start. I completely forgot. But we welcome your calls, and we'll stop whatever we're doing to take a question from you. And I think that one thing that we need to remember about this is that when everybody was engaged, when people did go and look at this information for themselves and do some research, they were horrified. They were like, how could we have done this to ourselves? And the activism you talk about back in the 70s and 80s brought the nuclear energy industry to a standstill. I mean, there were plans for tens of thousands of reactors all over the country, and that was stopped, luckily and thankfully. But you're right; it's a question of maintaining that knowledge in the popular culture. And if we let that fade out completely, then people will be like, "Well, what's wrong with nuclear power?" Because
people don't know anymore.
Because they obviously don't know.
When I talk to people about it, it's really been erased from the public consciousness that nuclear energy is dangerous. People think it isn't. They really think that.
Yeah, well,
whereas I remember it being common knowledge in the 70s and 80s that it was dangerous, and there was a lot of public sentiment against it.
Well, and that's the result of a deliberate misinformation campaign.
No doubt,
I mean, I have to say, I was going to mention this. I watched this show on Netflix. Well, it's a PBS Space Time. Actually, have these little 15-minute things on physics and stuff, which normally I love because it's all about black holes and cool stuff like that. But they did a show on thorium reactors and saying, "Oh, look at this wonderful energy for the future," and the comment section was just filled with thousands of just pro-nuke posts and how wonderful nuclear is. And I, of course, had to jump in there and say, whoa, wait a minute. But in those comments, there were people making claims like there's been no increase in cancer from Chernobyl or Fukushima.
There's been quite a bit of increase of cancer, is there not?
Yes.
Yeah, I thought so. I thought I remembered hearing about that.
But in the popular culture, in the social media, these trolls, I'll call them trolls, can just make a claim like that, and if nobody's there to counter them, and they just toss it out there, and that gets into people's minds. Oh, there's been no increase in cancer, I guess.
It seems odd that nobody is allowed to live there anymore if it's not in any way dangerous.
Yeah.
Right.
That does seem a bit odd.
I think also the challenge is that, radiation exposures, unless you're, right up against a huge blast, the incubation period is a long time. And then it becomes difficult to prove. This is the challenge.
Right.
It's 10 years more. It's long periods until cancers might develop. And it's also multi-generational. And it's very easy to say, well, we don't know, and because we're all exposed to many things that are carcinogenic today, it doesn't make them safe. And there's new information coming about from Chernobyl right now, which is pretty damning, from Kate Brown's new book, A Manual for Survival. She's gone into the medical archives and looked at things. So, but it is difficult. It's hard. We're not lab rats. We don't live where we can do these tests where, well, what happens if you're exposed to this radioisotope, and you watch the person because we don't live like that.
And we shouldn't.
Challenged with all kinds of toxins.
Yeah, no, yeah. So did the women that you interviewed for this movie have sort of direct personal experiences with health problems that could possibly be linked?
All of the families have health issues, and again, you can't make direct correlation, but there's a lot of cancers in the community. Infant mortality rates doubled the year after the meltdown, and then there's new studies coming out. Dr. Goldenberg has a study looking at biomarkers indicating important information. We need more on this. Looking at the thyroid cancers, Dr. Renu Joshi is working on something about where she's starting to see higher rates of rare thyroid cancers. And Steve Wing's study is instrumental and needs to be looked at, and more needs to be done on that in terms of he did blood draws and looked at levels of radiation in blood. And so, we need more, and certainly, and the challenge always is where's the funding and all of that. But we do know, one of the people experienced a lot of symptoms of radiation exposure, metallic taste in the mouth, and all those indications. And so, but it's not something we can prove for absolute sure right now. This has always been the challenge of 3 Mile Island. But what we do know is that these folks lived right up against the plant. They were not told for 2.5 days that anything serious was happening. So the worst part of the meltdown occurred in the first day, and they were not told to evacuate then. And then 2.5 days later, pregnant women and young children were told to evacuate within a certain pretty close radius. But what about areas around it? And we all know depends where the wind is blowing. And so that was pretty shocking to them. I think that was the big thing, was a loss of faith for our 4 mothers. They really, and the community, was a sense of, how can we trust you if you let us go for 2.5 days without telling us? That even if you don't know for sure, we have the right to know that there's potentially something very dangerous happening, and we should have the option to leave and to know, and we want to be informed. And when they tried to be informed, they were told things like, literally go home and bake cookies. That was told to these mothers, and they just felt like they were not being treated, with respect that they were due as people living right on top of the plant, essentially, right there.
Well, yeah, and now they're making the claim, the nuclear industry is making the claim that most health effects from a nuclear meltdown or a nuclear disaster are from the stress of evacuating away from the nuclear disaster. So their plan for us on the next meltdown is just stay there and get irradiated.
Keep very calm.
Right.
Nothing bad can happen to you.
All right. Well,
it is stress. There is a stress issue, and it's not that that's not true, and that it is psychologically very challenging. If you've lived through that, and then you have to continue. The other thing, so that is, I would agree that they did have tremendous psychological stress, but then they couldn't move. They couldn't sell their houses. Nobody was offering to buy them out and make it easy for them to move. They didn't have that option.
Right.
So there's that too. That's an issue for a lot of people in Fukushima. Not everyone is sort of given payments to move away, and so they're stuck with mortgages. And we don't think about that. But what happens if there's a meltdown like that? How can you afford to leave? You don't necessarily have the option to do that.
It said on Google, one of the things that it had to tell me was that 100,000, I was doing my 5 minutes of research for this, was that 100,000 people moved away from the area, mortgage or no mortgage, after the accident.
I don't know the exact numbers, but I know I've interviewed many people who, there was something called the Fukushima divorce, because men would feel they couldn't give up their jobs or their homes, and women were saying,
oh, man.
We can't live here with our children. It's not safe for them. And it really it's a terrible position to put people in, to have to make that choice.
I wonder how it affected, what were the long-term effects on the economy of Harrisburg, just losing that many people, Well,
people didn't. As far as my knowledge is, the thing is you couldn't leave, so people did not. They stayed.
Right.
But they stayed with tremendous stress.
Mm-hmm. Well, and it's not something...
I'm sure some people moved. I don't think it was as... I actually haven't looked into... I shouldn't speak too quickly, but I don't... From my knowledge, there was not a mass evacuation. But people stayed. Some people wanted to move but couldn't.
Well, much like Flint.
And also remember, the plant was shut down for 6 years, and the reactor number 1, which was off, they didn't restart for 6 years. So one of the reactors was not affected, and the community fought it to keep it shut down, and they lost the case. They actually went all the way to the Supreme Court.
Right, but
they didn't want the reactor turned back on.
But the other, there were 2 reactors. One melted down. They restarted the other, but they have just finally decommissioned the other. So finally,
yes,
September, the era of nuclear generation at 3 Mile Island is finally over. So, all right. And unfortunately, our interview is also over, Heidi.
Thank you so much.
Yeah, thanks very much. If people want to get more information about this movie that you're working on so diligently, how can they find out about it?
We have a website called accidentscanhappenthefilm.com, And you can go to the website, accidentscanhappenthefilm.com. Our trailer is there, and you can read about it and follow us and subscribe. And it's a really beautiful film. The women are just really extraordinary, and Jane Fonda's in the film, and Bonnie Raitt's in the film, and Greg Yatso, who was the former head of the NRC during the Fukushima period, and Dr. Mark Jacobson from Stanford, Kate Brown, a lot of really amazing experts, and lots of support. Dr. Helen Caldecott. Really, it's a beautiful film and a beautiful story about the four moms.
All right. Well, thank you very much, Dr. Heidi Hutner, for being on For a Green Future.
Thank you so much. Take care. Bye-bye.
Bye. All right. Now it's time to hear from our wonderful sponsors. But, of course, we've got plenty of time also to hear from you at 866-240-1065. What did you think of Dr. Hutner and what she had to say? Or what do you think about any environmental issue that's been bothering you or in your consciousness for the past week or so? We'd be happy to talk with you on any environmental topic. 866-240-1065. And we are also very happy to have some wonderful sponsors. One of them is the Wood County Park District. The Wood County Park District is a natural resources conservation agency. They protect natural spaces, maintain quality green spaces, provide engaging program, and they teach people to love and respect nature, restore wildlife habitats, and lead outdoor adventures. The Wood County Parks protects 20 parks and nature preserves all around Wood County, which are open from 8 a.m. to 30 minutes past sunset every day of the year. And for those of you listening outside the immediate area, Wood County is directly south of Lucas County, which is where Toledo is. So it's a nice little drive down there and some really nice parks. You can check them out on the web at wcparks.org, and they have an app. It's a park system with its own app, and you go to the App Store and download WC Parks, and that'll tell you what kind of cool events and kind of things they're doing at the parks. And you can call them anytime at 419-353-1897. So the Wood County Park District, it's bringing nature to you. Our other sponsor is DeMar Consulting. DeMar Consulting is a computer consulting company. They will come to your home and help you with your computing problems. Maybe it's a hardware problem, a bad power supply, or a disk drive that's not reading. Maybe it's a software problem. You actually just don't know how to use your email system. Whether it's a question of hardware, software, or operator, any one of those problems they can solve at DeMar Consulting. And there's two ways to get a hold of DeMar Consulting. One is to call or text at 419-973-3000. That's 419-973-3000. Or you can go to their website, demarconsulting.com. And DeMar is spelled D-E-M-A-R-E, then the word consulting.com for all your home computing needs. All right. Well, so now on to another topic. And don't worry, we do have a letter from the future. And if I could remember it, we will, in fact, hear from Marie I., my great-great-great-granddaughter. But I just came across this past week the latest scheme, the latest evil plan. And, you know, it's not hard to picture a Mr. Burns, for example, over there at the Duke plant at
rubbing
Davis
his little
Besse.
skeletal hands together and cackling.
They are planning to apply to the Public Utilities Commission, or PUCO, that's their actual name, to decouple their electric rates from electric usage. Now, I know this doesn't intuitively make a lot of sense, because right now what happens is you use so much power, you get charged so much per kilowatt hour, and so you use a lot of power, your bill goes up. You only use a little bit of power, your bill goes down. They want to get rid of that. And the convoluted argument to support this is that utility companies don't have any incentive for energy conservation, because they make their money based on how much power they sell. So if people use less power, that just means less revenue for them. and so they don't actually want there to be conservation. So the theory that is that you uncouple price from usage, and now the utility will be like, oh, hey, now let's do some conservation.
Because
right. That part of the incentive is
why do they want to do
a little
this?
fuzzy. Well, now the places where this does work, because there's a few states that have, actually almost half the states have some form of decoupling, but the few states where you can definitely say they decoupled and their energy conservation went way up, they're using a lot less electricity, are states that mandate to the utilities, here's how much energy conservation you've got to do. And so in those states, you can make an argument for decoupling, because without it, people just use less power. There's less revenue for the utility. Then in those situations, the utilities can go bankrupt. Okay. But Ohio, thanks to the wonderful gift that keeps on giving of House Bill 6, we just eliminated our energy efficiency requirements and our renewable portfolio standard requirements. And so we eliminated the mandate to be more efficient, and now for the utility. And now if FirstEnergy gets this, it will eliminate the individual mandate to be more efficient, because no matter how much power you use, your bill's going to be the same.
Right. Again, I'm getting this sort of, is this ADD plus sleep deprivation, or does this really not make any sense at all?
Well,
I think it might be the second thing.
I don't have all the answers on this one yet.
Okay.
Because remarkably, there's actually very little reporting on the effect of this, even though this whole push towards decoupling started way back in 2009 or so. It's been going on for like a decade, and I can't find clear articles that say, yes, they decoupled, and yes, their electric usage went down. They're much more efficient now that they've decoupled, except for the states that have mandatory efficiency standards.
And who's actually behind all this? Do we know? Whose bright idea was this?
Well,
craziness.
Well, I mean, it's the idea of the utility companies and the professional.
Okay.
Yeah, and so that could kind of make you wonder.
And we already know that they can be trusted to look after our best interests as consumers, don't we, Joe?
Well, and the one thing I have found is I did find a study done through the University of Hawaii by Arlen Bruchel and Nori Tauri, T-E-R-U-I, Tauri. It was published in November of 2018 out of the University of Hawaii, and it showed that the net effect on people's rates is they go up about 20%.
Which is kind of what you would expect, applying common sense.
Right. Now, some environmental organizations have been champions of decoupling for the rationale that I tried to explain. It's not terribly rational rationale, but one, for example, was in Rhode Island. There was the Conservation Law Foundation actually forced decoupling in Rhode Island, and they said it's a win-win-win because it's great for the environment because there'll be more conservation, and it's great for consumers because prices won't go up that much, and actually,
that much being the key. That much. They will in fact go up, is what they're saying.
They
and that's
said
what that's a code for.
Well,
especially if you were one of those good people who was working really hard to conserve, you've now spent that money in the expectation that your home would be more energy efficient and therefore you would have a lower utility bill, and now you're going to pay for everyone else's mistakes.
Right. Well, yeah, that's it exactly. Now you have to pay for the energy hog next door.
Mm-hmm.
You're going to get dinged because they use a bunch of electricity that has to be bought and transported and paid for. And so they're paying for less than they're using because you're both paying the same amount. But anyway, they decoupled in 2013, and there was no big effect for a couple of years. But in 2017, the biggest Rhode Island utility came and said, well, we need a 52% rate increase. So, the idea that you eliminate the individual mandate and you eliminate the restrictions on the utilities both, which is how Ohio would be approaching this decoupling. Seems like a recipe for disaster.
Like the plan is just, let's go ahead and just trash the planet like rock stars. That's what we're going to do.
Yeah, I mean, it seems like what it would lead to is both higher prices and higher energy consumption and higher profits for First Energy, because they get to basically tell the PUCO, okay, well, now we need this rate.
Which it seems like an ugly feature of human nature that people would only conserve if they're forced to. But the thing is, that stuff that you need to do to your house to make it more energy efficient costs money, and you might be thinking, oh, I can't take that away from my family's expenses. But when it helps you save on your utility bill, then you're thinking, okay, well, I wanted to do this anyway for idealistic reasons, and now I can kind of justify it.
Yeah.
I can say I'm doing the responsible thing fiscally. It in that way, it kind of helps people to do the right thing, and it's kind of maybe better in the long run.
Sure. Well, and it acts as a reminder often. I mean, I've had months when I've looked at my electric bill and I said, whoa, what happened here? And I realized, like, I was running my air conditioner more than I needed to.
Right.
I could save a little bit. I could turn it off in the evening, and then I would do that, and then my bill would go down the next month, and I'd be okay. So it's just, I tend to want to conserve anyway. I think most people don't actively want to be wasteful of energy.
But you just get absent-minded sometimes.
Yeah, sometimes you need a little reminder, and electric bills do that right now. But if this decoupling goes through, they won't do it anymore. And what we can say with some certainty is maybe not the first year, maybe not the second year, but pretty soon there'll be rate increases, and that's kind of down the line. Unless the utility is also restricted legislatively to, like, caps on the rate increases or things of that nature. But that's not what we're looking at in Ohio. In Ohio, we're looking at removing all the restrictions and decoupling the prices from the usage. So,
remember when we lived in Western Kentucky in the mid to late 1970s? It was blisteringly hot all the ever-loving times, 6 months out of the year, and we had like a one air-conditioned room that you could go and sleep in if you just really could not handle the heat, or read a book in or whatever. And that's mostly where we hung out in the summer. That's what we did.
Yeah.
Also, you could go swimming in October outdoors, so that was cool.
That's nice. Well, and the ironic thing is that in some places of the country that have tons of wind and solar, there's actually times when the electricity is too cheap to meter.
Wow.
Because they're putting so much power on the grid, they don't even charge people for it.
Cool.
And, I mean, that's the best of all those worlds is you switch over to the cheapest possible energy supply, and you have so much of it that you literally don't need to measure it anymore. You can just charge a small flat fee. But we're talking about charging a large flat fee that would cover everybody else's electric bill as well as your own.
So it's a little like a soap opera at that point. I found, that the interesting things about the way to actually turn soap operas into an intellectual exercise so your brain doesn't go dead is to predict the worst thing that anyone could do in a particular situation, and that is what the characters will do. Like, is there some tiny, trivial thing that if they just fessed up about it now, then everything would be fine? Well, let's have them wait for a year and a half, and then to tell the person after they're super angry, and there have been cover-ups on tops of cover-ups, and they've had to do all these horrible things to keep this stupid, trivial secret.
Right, yeah.
That's kind of the level at which the Ohio energy policy is currently operating, as far as I can tell.
It is there are definite resemblances to soap operas.
A little,
and,
yeah.
All we need is for the First Energy CEO to be a guy with a really short haircut and an eye patch.
And we've all apparently got massive amnesia, too, so it holds up.
Yeah. Well, one thing that will hold up, though, is our society, because we know we're going to get over this. We're going to figure these things out and make the right decisions as a society.
And we know this because we're about to hear from Marie, right?
That's right.
Yay.
For about the year 2299, my great-great-great-granddaughter has sent me a letter, and it's a short letter this week, but full of import. Dear great-great-grandpa, great-great-great-grandpa, I'm going to Mars. The drilling project to dispose of nuclear waste generated in your time is stalled. So they're sending me to Mars as part of a team that will look at the possibility of disposing of the wastes on Mars. I've decided to take a vacation at the same time and visit my brother Sam, who's living at the Martian colony. My request for a leave was granted, and I'm leaving next week. Space travel is much more routine in the year 2299 than in your time, but it's still a big deal to go to another planet. Sam is thrilled that he'll be seeing me again. I've got to go now. Lots of packing to do. Love, Marie I. So.
Mars, huh?
Mars, yeah, an interesting plot twist for our.
Wow.
Yeah, my
so
descendant there.
Is it just going to be? Did she say? Is it going to be a short trip, or are they actually going to be colonizers, or what?
I don't know.
She doesn't know.
I don't know.
Okay.
We have to.
Might depend on how she likes it there. Yeah.
Sure. Yeah, but it should be interesting because if we go to Mars or the Moon or any other planet, the way right now there's plans to set up a permanent base on the Moon. We're going to have to figure out the environmental conditions. We're going to have to make sure that people get enough air, they get enough water, that they don't get diseases while they're up there that they can't treat. We're going to have to create mini ecologies around all these.
Or terraforming, they call it in the science fiction stories.
Right.
Make it like Earth.
Well, terraforming would be to change.
Enough like Earth that we can survive there.
Yeah, but first we have to start out in our little enclosed little terrariums that humans can live in, and that to do that successfully you need to have an understanding of ecology, and to do that successfully we have to learn and pay attention and teach ourselves. So thanks all for listening. This is Joe DeMar
and Rebecca Wood,
and we're signing off.
No more three-headed frogs or kids with leukemia. Nuclear power ain't fit for a dog. The sun will give us all we need to make this country run. But that nuclear power's got us cussing and fighting